everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I would like to welcome you to the EDFacts Modernization Update webinar. My name is Jess Green, and I am the EDFacts Partner Support Center lead. And I'd like to introduce the presenters of today's webinar, who are from the elementary and secondary branch of the department. They are Kelly Worthington, Barbara Tim, David Lee, Chin Soo Chin, and Liz Fenning. If you have any questions throughout the duration of today's webinar, we have not had one in quite some time, so I'm going to remind you to enter those questions in the Q&A chat, the Q&A panel on the bottom right of your screen, and not the chat panel, to ensure that we receive your questions and can address them today. We are actually going to answer questions throughout the presentation, so we're going to take moments and stop in between slides and just address the questions as we go and as they're relevant to the content what we're covering. As always, the PowerPoint and the slide deck that's used today and the recording of the webinar will be available on our Community of Practice website. We will also upload the question and answer log with responses from the department once it becomes available and is finalized. We will notify you guys when it's available via broadcast. So just be on the lookout for that later this week or the beginning of next week. And before I forget, because we have a pretty decent webinar today, if you're not able to stay through the entire duration of the presentation, at the end of your session, or if you do stay till the end, there's going to be a post-webinar survey that's going to appear. We're asking just take a few minutes to respond to that survey so that we can adjust future webinars accordingly, but also provide any responses if it's after the fact and you have some questions for the team. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Next slide. So today's agenda is pretty full. So we're going to cover what's going on with the OMB package and provide an update. And then probably answer all of your modernization questions. Why we're modernizing, what exactly is changing, how will this new application work? And we're definitely going to focus on data governance. It's going to be a pretty big topic. And then what's the schedule? What should you guys be looking forward to in the coming months, and how to strategize and plan for modernization efforts? We're also going to have a special guest from NCES. Chin Soo Chin is joining us to give us an overview of the CCD pilot and what was learned from that process. As you remember, we piloted the modernization process. So what came out of that? Lessons learned, what worked and what didn't work? And what do you need to do now? What are some actionable steps that you can take as the EDFacts coordinator and the CCD non-fiscal coordinator and apply those to your day-to-day to prepare for the new processes that we're going to start following? So right now, I am actually going to turn it over to David Lee. He is, as I mentioned, with the elementary branch of education, and he's going to run things today. So it's all yours, David.
Thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Lee, and as Jess mentioned, I am part of the EDFacts team, working on the modernization of our system, and I was asked to present and provide an update to you all. Most of this content will be familiar. I'm sure you've been in other webinars or conferences where we've provided updates, but we do think that it's important to provide a refresher just in case you have additional questions that may come up during our presentation or have any follow-up that you need regarding modernization. So please bear with me if it's repetitive, but I think it's good information to have. One thing I wanted to kind of remind you as well that Jess mentioned is that we do have a Q&A section, I believe, through WebEx. Jess is going to monitor that. I can't see that as I'm presenting, so I will pause between each section to see if there are any questions that we can answer. If we can answer those directly in the chat or the Q&A function, we'll try and do that. If not, and it should be addressed to the entire audience, I'll ask Jess to read those out and we can try and answer those as we go along. Okay. So as Jess had mentioned, the first item on our agenda is the OMB package update. You should all know that the OMB package, the 30-day comment period ended recently. And so we've actually moved the entire final package over to OMB for review. So OMB is currently looking at that, at the package, and we anticipate approval sometime in July. And assuming that we do get actual approval in July, the following three things will happen. We will distribute functional file specs in August, September, and most likely October as well. And if you've seen the package, we have several new data collections that we are proposing. So we will also distribute draft file specs for the new data collections for your input and comments. We will also be scheduling CDS meetings to discuss these new data collections. So why are we modernizing? Why modernize? The key to this is usable data as of or at the due date. There are several reasons why we're modernizing EDFacts. First is the technical reason. So as you all know, EDFacts has been around for a while. I believe we're reaching maybe 15 years. So it's just time for us to modernize our system and our technology. Also, our security requirements need updating. So that's part of our technical reason why we're updating or modernizing EDFacts. But also we have operational reasons. Currently, what is not working is that the data are not usable as of the due date. I think you all are very familiar with this process where we have a very arduous process of DQ, post-submission DQ work that goes back and forth between the department and the states. So that's just not working operationally in terms of resources and efficiency. And then that kind of speaks to the second bullet there, post-submission data quality process. It's just unsustainable and inefficient from a department point of view. We are pouring in a lot of resources and time into the data quality process post-submission. And so we're trying to solve these problems or these issues through modernization. We have several goals and priorities for modernization. First is to improve data review and use processes. So as I mentioned, we are trying to get to a point where data are usable as of the due date. We will also provide tools to support state processes. Undoubtedly, with our modernization, states will need to update your processes, internal processes, to match or meet our modernization goals. So we are here to provide tools to support that. And also, we want states to take ownership of data quality. Ultimately, the data that states submit to the department are the responsibility of the state. So we're trying to help you, the states, to take ownership of data quality. And like I said many times, high quality and usable data as of the due date. So our goal is to eliminate the resubmission process post due date. So as of the due date, when we receive data from the state, we're expecting high quality data that are usable at the due date. So what exactly is changing? As I mentioned, what's the most significant part that's changing is from post-submission data quality to pre-submission data quality. And I'll kind of expound on that a little bit in the next few slides. But what is the impact to the states? There are two main impacts. First is to reduce follow-up post-submission. As I mentioned before, the current process is post-submission. There's a lot of data quality back and forth between the state and the department. And so one of the main impacts to the states here is that we are trying to reduce, if not eliminate, any follow-up that's required for data quality post-submission. And then the second important impact to the state is that the states have control over data quality, and it's not dependent on ed staff availability or timelines. As you know, the current process of post-submission DQ is heavily dependent on when ed can respond to data quality comments, when ed sets the timeline for data quality review, And this is all post-submission. Now, what we want the states to take ownership of is that they have control over data quality prior to submitting data to the state. So what does not change for the state? States continue to submit aggregate data by the due date. So you will still have control of the data that you submit and how you submit the data. States retain control over when data are submitted. So as I mentioned, you'll be controlling when the data are submitted, but clearly we'd like you to get those in by the due date. And so what does change with modernization? First, one of the main impacts I think most of you will be in favor of is that the due dates will be adjusted. Because we mentioned that now the data quality process is heavily reliant on pre-submission. During the pre-submission process, we are proposing to move due dates as many as possible to allow for additional time for states to conduct their pre-submission data quality prior to submitting data at the due date. Another thing that will change is that the business rules are applied prior to data submission. Again, this is just repeating the same emphasis is that business rules, data quality will be applied prior to data submission as of the due date. And then states will submit final data at the due date. And the most important part is that ED receives usable data as of the due date at the due date. Okay. Just a quick visual representation of what the current EDFacts cycle is. It's mostly at a high level, it's a 5-step process. States will submit data by the due date to ESS. Some business rules will be applied during submission. So this is where in the legacy system, so the current system, we apply some business rules during submission, and then we also apply a significant number of data quality rules, business rules post-submission. And that's where the back and forth is. So step 3, data are pulled and data quality review is conducted post-submission. And then data quality results are sent to states to review, and states must resubmit files or respond to data quality findings. So as you can see here, steps, I guess 2.5, 3, 4, and 5 are all post-submission steps in our process. The new modernized EDFacts cycle will actually be a 3-step process where all of our business rules will be applied during pre-submission. And I'll show you a visual example of that in a little bit here. But so all the business rules will be applied pre-submission, and then as of the due date, the states will submit their data. And then the final step is because all the data quality process has already happened prior to the due date during pre-submission, as of the due date, data are usable once submitted. And no post-submission data quality review is needed. So I'm going to pause here, Jess, if there are any questions that you would like to share with the group or that I could try and answer or address.
Sure. There's no questions. There's just one comment when you were talking about like what is changing. The comment is from June in Colorado, and it's the states do not have control over how long it takes ED to approve state comments, though. So that does impact timelines for submission. So I believe what she's talking about is such as the current DMS process, when states go in and upload comments, they're reviewed by the department before they consider their submission final. So I think that process will change slightly.
Yeah, that within the new EDFacts system application, we are also talking about something similar to DMS, where the program office within the department has access to data notes prior to submission. So during the pre-submission DQ process, adding data notes to your data is a required step. And so we're talking about that process in terms of the department program offices providing technical assistance or some type of support to review data notes or provide input on data notes and data quality errors pre-submission. So there's the ability for states to ask the department for help, whether they submit data notes and say, OSEP, can you review our data notes to make sure that they are of acceptable quality to the department? That support will not go away with this. It'll just be part of the pre-submission process. And we have a slide, a high-level process slide that will explain that in a little bit, and hopefully June will that'll answer June's question or concern.
Okay. Right. The next one, it says, in the modernized version of EDFacts, what would replace the option of leaving a comment or explanation instead of a resubmission that is there for the current CDQR process?
Can you repeat that question for me?
Yep. So we're looking at the modernized process slide that you have. So in the modernized version of EDFacts, what would replace the option of leaving a comment or explanation instead of a resubmission that is there for the current CDQR process? So David, in the current process, they respond to the, the data quality edit in the state response column saying they add the data note instead of resubmitting. So I think they're talking about that process.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, that process, the adding data notes and comments and explanations will all be part of the pre-submission DQ process. And I think these type of questions will be answered when I show the next slide of how the new application will work. And I suspect that I'm not entirely understanding that question because I think I'm failing to understand what the current process they're referring to is. But hopefully that slide, when I get to it, it'll explain it a little bit further.
I think your comment's accurate, but I agree. I think your slide will kind of provide a little bit more context. Okay. One more question. It's from Fawn in Michigan, and she says, Ed plans to make data quality checks available as soon as possible, correct?
Yes.
I'm concerned about new and or changed business rules.
Okay. The answer to that is a yes. We are trying to get the BRSI reviewed and updated and published as soon as possible. And if you have any concerns about business rules that have changed or need some explanation, certainly you can reach out and we can help you through that process. But again, we understand this is a new process for the states, obviously, because now it's a pre-submission DQ rather than a post-submission. So there will be some adjusting that states will need to do in terms of reviewing their data against our business rules earlier in the process. But as I mentioned before, we are trying to accommodate for that by adjusting the due dates and hoping that our TA and any other help we can provide prior to that will alleviate some of that concern.
That's it.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. Kelly, I know you'd come off of on camera. Did you want to make a comment?
I was just going to announce that regarding the question, I think Ali's question about a question about the modernized version of EDFacts and the comment process. We're going to actually be having a specific webinar about data notes and the role that they'll play in the process. So if a business rule triggers, you're either going to leave a data note or you're going to resubmit. Those are the two options for the future process. But we'll be talking about that more in the fall. So that was just my my advertising plug for the upcoming webinar in a couple of months.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. Okay, so let's move on here. So how will the new application work? This is a slide that I was referring to. This is a very high-level slide. You'll see it's my my attempt to show a flow chart. Not sure if it did very well, but so if you go from left to right here in the process, SCAs will collect data required to submit. So as I mentioned, currently our 3-year OMB package is under review, and we're hoping to get that finalized by July. So as of July, when we get that finalized and posted, the SCAs will know what to collect and what they are required to submit. A new process is this upload file. So in the current process, our uploading and submitting were kind of synonymous. So once you upload or submit a file to ESS, that was it. So what happens in our new process is, our new application is that you would upload your file, and once you upload your file, there's file error processing that occurs, and that's similar to our current process where a file will be rejected for format issues or whatever errors that there are. But once your file is uploaded, that's when this DQ processing occurs. Okay, so this area here between the SCA's collect data required to submit and due date, this is all pre-submission, what we're referring to as pre-submission. So once you upload your file successfully and you go through your data quality processing. Now, once you go through your data quality processing, there are your DQ results. Those results, as Kelly had mentioned, will either require a data note or a re-upload. Now there should be an arrow here, but just trying to be, in order to be a little simple, I just left it as a one lane flow chart. But from your DQ results, the two actions that Kelly had just mentioned are either to re-upload or correct your data or provide a data note. Once that is done, your data become ready to submit. Once your data are ready to submit, that's when you're actually submitting your data by the due date to the department. So all the pre-submission happens on the left side prior to submission of the process, of the new process. And once the due date hits, we have usable data. That's the new process that we are implementing with our modernization. Okay. Key differences for the processes. There's required action of uploading the data before the due date, meaning you upload your files, you address any data quality errors, and you submit the data by the due date. The new application will include the state submission plan. So there's no separate SSP that you need to go to. We will have an integrated SSP, state submission plan, where you can know if a file will be late or what for an approved reason, or any other comments you'd like to make for a file. And then for business rules that fail, you have to either correct the data or add a data note, and all business rules must be addressed before submitting the data. One of the new processes is that data notes can be applied to multiple rows of errors. So I know that in the current process, when states would want to add the same data note for multiple rows, they would have to add it in for every single line or row, but we'll have the ability to apply multiple, a data note for multiple rows of errors. And then the EDFacts coordinator will be able to set up users within their state. This we'll explain in a later slide, on a future slide. Okay, so I'm going to pause here, Jess, again. That's the new system, the new process that we're proposing, and I'm hoping that that may have answered some questions or maybe triggered some additional ones.
Yeah, so 2 came in. One is kind of a comment, but is looking for feedback. It's from June, Colorado. Some of the data comes in right before the file is due. An example is homeless data that she gets about 8 days prior to the due date. She won't have a lot of time to do data quality up front if Ed has to approve comments prior to a due date. Is there an anticipated turnaround for Ed to approve comments in the upfront data quality process in order for the file to be submitted on time?
Okay, I'll try and answer that. I think there are two questions there. So number one, if currently your data, whatever data it may be, are coming in, let's say the day before the due date, because we're proposing the due date to be pushed back to allow for this pre-submission process, let's say a month. So now you'll have a month to do the pre-submission process. So hopefully that in itself will help you, June, in your ability to collect the data and do a data quality review prior to submitting the data. The second part of your question regarding Ed's response time, that we've had several internal discussions about the availability and the I guess the amount of access that the program officers should have to data quality notes or the data prior to submission. And so that's a process that we're still working through. But I would like to emphasize that if there are things that you anticipate within your state, for example, if you anticipate data coming in very close to the due date and you need some help with data quality, you can certainly reach out to the department through PSC to say, OESC, we're expecting homeless data to be very close to the due date. Can you help us or be ready to help us answer some questions or put in some data notes, help us to review and put in some data notes. Kelly, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I would add that our goal here is that there will be no surprises when for what is the expectation for data quality? What is the standard for a comment that you need to submit? So that's why we're going to do some trainings on, these are the things that we are observing today about data comments that we're receiving that will no longer be acceptable, like a business rule triggered and the response is we check the data and it's right. No context, no additional information, nothing that says that, the business rule is wrong, or something that is more substantive to explain why did this business rule trigger if the data are correct. So that there's one thing related to training that I think is going to be important for everybody to participate in and understand what is the expectation. The other piece of that is we'd consider the data notes to be within the state, the state responsibility piece. We'll give you the guidance, the standard, the information, the timelines, we're moving the due dates. And if there is something that you cannot solve after all of that information, then reach out to the department and the program offices. They're going to have limited capacity before the due date. And you should know, you should be able to take the information that we're giving and submit that. So I know we have not done a lot of that in the past. So in the future, we're going to be emphasizing the data notes, the data comments, and working with the program offices on a process that works both for you and for our program offices. I know timing of responses has been a problem in the past, and some of you don't get responses to your tickets until after the due date is already passed, and we cannot continue to do that. So those are things that we are trying to fix, and that's the earlier slide of what are the problems we're trying to fix. We are trying to fix a number of problems that have had a big impact on your ability to submit good information by the due date. So that would be my additional context there, David.
Thank you, Kelly. Jess, any other questions or comments?
Yep, there's two more. This is from Maryland. Are you able to resubmit submitted data if it's prior to the due date? Or can data only be submitted once and should be final as possible?
Prior to the due date, you are able to submit data as many times as you need to. But obviously, having a clean set of data is obviously ideal. But yes, the short answer is yes, you are able to resubmit data prior to the due date.
Okay, perfect. And then the other question is, after you submit, if an issue arises with the data, is the state able to re-upload and go through data quality and comment before the deadline with the corrected information? I think you just answered that.
Yeah, I think it's the same question, just asked differently. But yes, you are able to go through all this process before the due date multiple times as needed.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, so the next part here is we are going to give you a sneak peek at some of the mock-ups of the new application. One thing I'd like to note is that these screens are still under development, meaning that they're for draft use only. We're still trying to figure out the best way to present and build the new application. So please keep that in mind, and I'll try and share a few things here. Okay, the first screen here is the file list. So one thing I'd actually like to note is that the new name of our application will be called EDPass. So capital E, capital D, capital P, lowercase a, S, S. So there's no hyphen and there's no more need for italics. I think a lot of people share that idea. So the new name of our application will be called EDPass. So this is our mock-up of the file list. As you can see, you'll have all the due dates on the left side with the school year, the file spec numbers, the file spec names, whether they are collected at the SCA LE at school level, and then the statuses, meaning whether they're submitted, there's some errors, ready to submit, no data, meaning that there hasn't been any data uploaded. The three dots here, the menu here are the menu for each file. So you can go to the SSP, upload, and you address any DQ results, and also submit your data if they are ready to submit. Some of the cool features here is that you can filter as well, you can search, you can print, and you can download I guess kind of like a report of the list of files and their statuses. Okay, the next screenshot is the upload screen. So here you'll be able to, it's similar to some of the other pages that you've probably seen where you can drag your file or browse your files, Windows Explorer and upload files. You'll see the file spec number, name, the data groups, and then the file ID and file name that you're using, along with the level and the upload time and status. Okay. And then actually, let me go back and see if there are any questions here. I'd like to pause to see if there are any questions on the file list mockup.
There's no questions on the file list mockup. One
Okay.
came about what you were speaking about before.
Upload?
No, it has to do with resubmissions after a due date.
Okay. Why don't we hold off on that real quick, and then let me just show the
Okay.
last mockup here. So the last mockup here has to do with data quality errors. This is our data quality error page. As you can see, we're trying to give you as much information as possible. The state LEA ID number, state school ID, school name, level, the data, and then there's a data note. So some of the key things here is there's a download function where you can download this report of all your DQ errors. And the error page lists the errors using the state LEA and school IDs. I think that's important. I think we do get quite a few comments from states currently when we send back DQ comments from Ed asking for LEA and school IDs. So that'll be right there. And then the DQ error page allows you to select multiple items and add a single note. So you can click these and then go to add data note function, and then you'll be able to add a single data note. Okay, so I'm going to pause there, see if anyone has any questions about the mockups, please enter them. And then, Jess, you mentioned that there was another question about the submission
Sure.
process.
One of them was, will pre-submission dates be available so we'll know when we can begin? And I think that's similar to the current process of ESS releases when a broadcast is sent, when the files are active for submission and upload.
Yes, so it sounds like they're asking about file specs and also when the application will be open. So yes, that will follow the same process we have now, where we will send a broadcast to state saying these file specs are enabled and the application is open for you to upload your data.
Okay. And then Kentucky said, what about after a due date? Can a state still resubmit or comment? Sometimes data issues are found for the previous year's data, and we can currently resubmit anytime to fix it.
So the resubmission of prior year data, because you need to correct your data, that's something that we've thought about, but I hesitate to give you a final answer on that because it's still in discussion, and we'll try and get that answered in the Q&A section when we do post this. But anything that you're submitting post due date. So if I can go back here, anything that you're submitting post due date, because the new process expects data to be usable as of the due date, we are not allowing the system to just automatically we are not enabling the system to automatically allow states to upload and submit data that have passed the due date. I think in the current EDFacts, like the person said, you can go in and upload data or submit data even past the due date. But post due date for the new modernized process, we are not allowing that. And you would need some type of special permission from the department to do so. And so that process, again, is still in discussion on how we're going to handle those. But as I've emphasized, and I think you've heard multiple times, the new process itself with the pre-submission data quality, ideally we'll get to a place, we will all get to a place where once the data are submitted as of the due date, they will be final and usable. And I apologize, I know that doesn't directly answer the question, but like I said, I'm hesitant to give a final answer on something that we're still discussing. So we'll try and answer that during the QA part when we post the QA, but hopefully that'll suffice for now.
Okay. Next question is, will states continue to submit CSV files?
You know what, I'm gonna, if Barb is available, I don't want to put her on the spot, but Barb, are we still allowing for the same file formats?
Yes, we do allow, we're going to still allow for CSV to upload the data into the application.
Okay. There's one more. Actually, a couple more. What role do SEDS and Generate play in the process?
That's a great question, and I'm glad Barb just chimed in because I feel most comfortable Barb answering that question, if you don't mind, Barb.
Sure, I don't mind. So on the, sorry about my background's a little dark. For the SEDS part, one of the things we mentioned early on for the new data is we're going to have some SEDS workshops to explain the new data requirements in terms of SEDS. And we're using SEDS as a way of helping states to organize the data that they're going to submit to ED. Generate it has the same pre-submission. So we are working with Generate so that files that come out of Generate would go into this process and run through it and be able to be submitted.
Thank you for that. Okay, it's important to know that data may pass all rules and changes can still come in. Just something to consider as you develop the new process. Okay.
Yes, that is. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that note. We do understand that data may come in later than sooner, even if you've passed all the DQ checks. Yes, thank you.
And then one more question, David. Am I understanding correctly that the new system will not accept any files past the due date?
The short answer to that is yes. Files will not be accepted past the due date. But like I've said before, if we're following this new process, all the data should have gone through data quality review and should be of high quality when the due date comes for submission, and the data should be usable as of the due date. Now, I think we all know that nothing is perfect. So if things don't happen the way we all plan, of course, like I mentioned, that would be a special exception. But that is not something that we are anticipating, hopefully, that will be needed very much because of our new process that we are implementing with EdPass.
Okay, that's it.
And also just to keep in mind, sorry, Jess, there is that I know a lot of times, and I think June had mentioned this, that currently data come in very close to the due date, right? So oftentimes a state may need to submit data by the due date just because it's come in very close and you need to get something submitted. And I'd like to remind you all that we are looking at changing or updating the due dates, so pushing them back in order to accommodate what the time that states need to get through this DQ process. So if you look at it this way, is that all the post DQ work that was currently happening is basically happening before. So now, as of the due date, it's really just all your data quality have already happened, and then the due date you'll have all your final submissions. So there's just a bit of adjustment in terms of the timeline within your state and the way you think of how the data are reviewed and submitted to the department. But ultimately, this new process should help getting final high quality data, usable data as of the due date.
Okay. One more came in, David. Do you want me to go over it?
Oh, yes, please. Maybe I should stop answering these questions and then we can, yeah.
Will the new upload process still accept partial uploads where only a few rows need updating? Or will we have to upload full, complete new files with each upload?
Yeah, I'm going to let Barb chime in on that as well. Barb, do you mind handling the overlays? And
Yeah. Technical answer here is when you're uploading the files, you can upload partial files. For the submission, you do have to resubmit the entire package of data. So when you're doing your own work, if you have part of your stuff done, you can upload it and start working on it and clearing any rules that may have triggered, and then you can add more data to it. And then when you submit before due date, you submit the whole thing. If you need to resubmit, you resubmit the whole thing again.
thanks, Barb.
Barb, that's it, David.
Okay. Okay, so we've gone through some of the screenshots. So a bit more about the access and expectations, the data governance. I'm gonna kick this over to Kelly to go over through the data governance slide, and then she'll send it back to me. But Kelly. You're up
Sure.
for it.
This one it's also a bit of a change, and it's based on conversations that we have had with our data stewards within the department. The part of what's happening in the process today is that not all state data people are receiving usable data that they can evaluate that then gets populated into their annual reports. And what we are finding from our subject matter experts within the department is they're concerned that their data stewards are within the state are not participating in the data quality process until they're at the point where there's an annual performance report. So I just wanted to walk through real quickly here why we believe that this the subject matter experts participation is so critical in that data quality process. So the data use, the way from a department standpoint, we award grants for it's roughly 12 different grant programs, and that's what you're submitting those 80-ish files to represent is data that is required from that grant award. So those grants are awarded with certain data quality expectations and grant implementation requirements. When the program office within the department, whether it's charter, migrant, neglected delinquent, the special ed office, whoever that grant office is, they're looking at the timeliness of the data. Was the data submitted complete? Were all schools represented? Were all districts represented? Were all kids who should have been participating in that program represented? And they're creating, some of the offices are creating accuracy scores based on the data at the due date. We also, and I didn't put this in here, but we have an evidence act that is also driving changes within federal agencies right now. And we've got an Office of Chief Data Officer that is very interested in ensuring we are setting up everything that we are doing to support quality data, because they're also looking at why is it taking us so long to publish data, to use data. So there's a whole bunch of things that are happening in there, and I would expect to see more offices doing things like scoring and their data that they're receiving for their grant program. So what happens is you're submitting the data files. The data then get and I know many of you know this, but data get pre-filled into the grant program annual reports. Some of those state offices are telling us that they don't see the data until they receive the Consolidated State Performance Report or the state's performance plan, annual performance report for IDEA. And those are the two main things that we've got right now for annual performance reports. So the subject matter experts at that point have to explain data anomalies in a review process for the CSPR or for the SPP APR. And that tells us that there's a missing step in there before the data files are submitted where those subject matter experts are not participating in the data quality process. Or there's, and I know it's very, very complicated. The way that operations are within the states are just as complicated as they are within our offices. So I don't want to minimize how difficult that can be, the data governance piece of this, but ed offices use the data quality and the data notes to determine conditions that are placed on your state education agency on the next grant award. Right now, we've got the COVID money that has increased a lot of the grant amounts, but generally we're sending out $30 billion to states. The data that you are submitting to us is in response to those grant awards. And there can be fiscal conditions, there can be technical assistance conditions. There's a lot of conditions that can go with that. So I just want to make sure everybody understands what happens with the data once it's submitted. So that's why our goal is final data and meaningful comments at the due date. There are times when the data are correct and there's something about the implementation that is not correct. That's called non-compliance in the grant program office. The grant program office can explain that, where the data people don't always know the full context of that on the EDFacts side. And I know many of you are wearing multiple hats. Many of you already know this. Some states are not using their subject matter experts and data stewards in that data quality process. And we just have to emphasize here that this is an important piece of the process that needs to be adjusted where it needs to be adjusted. those data quality results need to be reviewed by our data stewards and subject matter experts within the state before the due date. That's part of that additional time frame there. And kudos to those of you who are already doing this. We are grateful, we appreciate it. The ed program offices can see the evidence of it. And this is also a plug for if there are any volunteers who would like to talk about how they do the data governance on data quality, how you involved your subject matter experts for those data files that are coming in. We would really appreciate, we're going to try to put together a panel for a future webinar when we're talking about those data notes in just a couple of months here. So if you would like to volunteer to talk about how you are involving your data stewards in data quality processes, we would really appreciate hearing from you. But I have to emphasize this because we made a commitment to our data stewards through our data governance process that we will encourage and we will support state data governance in the data quality process. So that's just, I know some of you already are doing it, have to say it. And if you've got questions about how to do that, I know many of you have statewide longitudinal data system SLDS grants. There's a lot of resources on data governance from SLDS. We've got a lot of technical assistance providers working on data governance. I just attended a SID meeting last week where it was specifically talking about, part of it was talking about data governance between the technical and the program office areas, which was phenomenally helpful to understand the complications of doing this, doing it well. But that's my piece on this, David. So I'll pass it back to you, or is it Barb that's going to talk through the access rights? I think it's you.
Thank you, Kelly. So as Kelly mentioned, there's a need and a requirement for data quality results to be reviewed by the data stewards or the SMEs, subject matter experts within your state. So along those lines, the new application will allow EDFacts coordinators to provide access. And that access will be set by function and by data area or data element. So you can see here the functions anywhere from uploading the submission plan, uploading data files, reviewing error reports, and submitting data files. And the data elements you can see on the right here in terms of depending on which data stewarding office or subject matter expert. Okay, and then so what's the schedule? I'm sure everyone is itching to know what the schedule is for our new application. We are targeting to open, so we're target opening for January 2023. It's about 5 months away. So as I mentioned, January in 2023, we're looking to open the new EdPass application. Just some general dates here. In February, the directory grades offered, and charter file specs will be available. As of April, membership, free and reduced price lunch and CCD. And then we get into May with IDA, June with staff FTE. And as I mentioned before, the due dates will be changing. So looks like we're going to be moving the IDA at least out 1 month. Okay. The next few slides, I'd like to turn it over to Chen Su. She's going to actually walk us through what she's learned from the CCD pilot. As you all know, we did a pilot, multi-phased pilot with CCD. So I'm gonna turn this over to Chen Su to present the next few slides.
Good afternoon, everybody. So for many of you who wear two hats, EDFacts and CCD coordinators, you probably have seen me many times since December because we held several webinars for CCD pilot, and we have the office hour every Thursday. So some of you may be tired of me, so I'm going to keep this brief, as brief as possible. When Kelly and Barb want me to talk about CCD pilots, what we have learned, the main message I want to say is that it's totally doable, and no doubt. So as of yesterday, when I checked DMS, we already have 17 states finish all the file submission, resolve all errors, no red, no blue cells, and it's all clean in DMS. And they are done almost. If those states, if you are one of the 17 states and you have finished your ad hoc analysis and you enter your comments in SSP, you're actually done for early CCD files. So it's totally doable based on what we have learned. And the goal, when we started the CCD pilot for 21-22, we have 3 goals, like we already mentioned earlier. We want to show state can take ownership of data quality, state can submit high quality data, usable data at the due date. And we want to show we can get rid of that resubmission after the due date. And you can, based on what we are seeing, we almost the end of phase 3. We are seeing states going to DMS, resolving the errors, either with resubmission or providing comments without our prompting. And I want to point out additional evidence. As you know, we are doing this pilot on 21-22 data collection, but we are also, meanwhile, in April and May, we also were doing the old model, using the old DQ model for job on completer for school year 2021. And the positive impact of the pilot already carried over to that when we were doing that follow-up. Because before we even spelling, not yet. Can you go back to the slide? Sorry. So the old model, we always, our analysts went to the DMS and summarize all the errors reports and send out the outreach email through PSC. But before we started, we had 17 states, same number, but probably not the same list. We already had 17 states finish everything, entering all the comments without our prompting. So I really see states, some of you really already taken ownership and start doing the DQ work on your own. And comparing in terms of data quality, we were comparing last year's number of errors to this year's number of errors. At the end of phase 1, at the end of phase 2, the remaining number of errors decrease compared to last year. And we also look at a drop on completer because we already finished that DQ follow-up. That number also very, very significantly dropped. So that's totally show the high quality of the data. And get rid of the resubmission, phase 1, phase 2. There are a couple exceptions because staff shortage and the critical errors. We had to accept case by case, resubmission, but I would say 98%, we are just pulling the data as of the due date. And if this phase 3 will end this Friday, just in two days, Friday, June 24th, we are not going to have any follow-up. If you finish everything in DMS, finish ad hoc analysis, enter comments in SSP, you're done. There's no resubmission. Next slide. So this is just big highlights. We move from the due date, we move 1 month from the 2021 due date for 1 month. It looks like it all worked out well for most of states. And phase 1, phase 2 complete. We already released the directory grades offer files on May 11th. And phase 2 data it's on the way out. It's in our internal review. So hopefully it will be out in August. And data notes, I have to say, I came on board at the end of 1819 data collection, while the 1819 was going to be released. And so I've been seeing 3 data collection cycle so far. And every year I'm seeing an improvement in the data notes quality. And this year, I have to say, I'm seeing much more substantive data notes. I remember because we want to have a webinar, we want to have a training later on. So I was taking notes, like when I going through the data notes, I was making marks on states, like this state, I'm going to use that example, their data notes for my example. But then while I was reading through all the data notes, I feel like I don't need to make notes because it's so easy to find good examples this year. So let's show you how much improvement we are making. You guys are. And we held webinar for each phase. Start the beginning before we start the collection. We have a kickoff meeting, and most of you participated. And we have office hour every Thursday. Some states come in with a very targeted specific question, and we were able to resolve the questions in just like 5-10 minutes. So I think that's very helpful tool for states. We may consider continue doing that for the new cycle, 22-23. The review cycle can be complete early. So in the past, like last year, you probably spend a lot of most of your summer dealing with us with your data quality issues that you probably don't in the summer, that you are dealing with something you already submitted in the spring and you may not remember. So but this year, if you finish everything again, including providing comments on ad hoc analysis in SSP, you are done this Friday. We will leave you alone and you are good to go. And I think that will really make really wrap up our the 21-22 data collection well. That's what I have for CCD pilot. Anyone have questions, or Kelly have any comments?
I'll wait and see if we have any questions here first. I don't think we do.
No,
that.
not related to this.
Okay. I do want to say that we were so encouraged by the work that you all put into the CCD pilot. And we called it a pilot to say we want to test out our plan for modernization before we go full scale on it. It seems to be extremely helpful for the state reducing that data quality time that was typically spent post due date. It's certainly saving time on our end, and the those like Chen-Su said, the data notes, the impact on having more substantive data means that the data that we end up publishing is more usable for our data users. So I'm just grateful for the time and attention that you put into that. Well, that's my thank you for that. And Chen-Su, I appreciate your summary here. The results have really been, I think if it's fair to say, the results have been astounding on the improvements that we've seen, and the months that have been taken off of the release of the data is exactly what we were hoping to see.
Okay. Thank you, Chen-Su, for that update regarding CCD. It's great to see and hear the great results that you're getting, and hopefully that will translate directly to our new EdPass application as well. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is wanting to know what do you need to do now. Don't wait until January 2023. And I'm very confident that nobody will, but I just want to share with you some actions that EDFacts coordinators can take. First, meet with data stewards to plan for pre-submission DQ. This was emphasized on the slide that Kelly presented regarding data governance, but please try and get those discussions and meetings sooner than later regarding the new process and our pre-submission DQ. Review how to write good data notes. In the fall, as Kelly had mentioned before, we will have additional webinars, one of which will be a brief webinar on how to write good data notes, what kind of data notes that the department is looking for, and what level of information or details that we need. So I've included a link here that you can, there's a document that we already have that you can refer to, but please look out for that fall webinar. It should be coming out shortly. Another action that can be taken is to determine who will need access and what type of access. So again, that page, that slide that we showed with the different functions and the data elements. So you may want to make a list to see who needs access to be able to perform certain functions within our new application, and then which data stewards or program offices need that access. As I mentioned before, with the new package, there are new data elements that we are proposing to collect. So please be on the lookout for the new file specs that we will be posting and looking for you to review and provide comments. And then also please participate in the CDS workshops on the new data elements that we will be collecting. Some tools that are available to you now, TA documentation. There's an example of an IDA TA document that you can refer to that talks about more along the lines of data notes. So we included that in as a sample here. And then of course the great PSC that we all like to refer to. So use PSC for questions that you'd like to ask of us. Please use them. They have a breadth and depth of knowledge that we all like to use. And then the Business Rule Single Inventory, the BRSI, that is basically the Bible of our business rules. So as I mentioned before, we are in the process of reviewing those. We're doing somewhat of an overhaul to standardize a lot of the business rules, to eliminate a lot of the redundant business rules. So hopefully when we get that done and published, you states will see that and say and acknowledge that it's a much more concise and standardized list of business rules. What to expect from the department in the next 6 months? As I mentioned before, webinars will continue. We will continue webinars to communicate and help alleviate transition hurdles. If you have anything that you'd like to ask of us, please don't hesitate to reach out for PSC. We'll try and get questions answered and provide any helpful TA documents as well. A lot of you have, I think a dozen of you have participated in our focus groups that have been happening over the past several months. And I just want to thank everybody who's participated in those. I think we've mentioned it during the focus groups, but I'd like to just reiterate that we do really appreciate the input. And I'm hoping that when you see the mock-ups or the actual application, EdPass, when it does launch, that you will see that we've really taken your input and your considerations to heart. And when we're building this new application, because we do, at the end of the day, we do want to make it as easily usable for the states. So we do appreciate that, and please look out for any future focus groups that we are putting together. Over the next several months, we will also be, I believe we'll be selecting a group of states to help us with some user acceptance testing. So if you see a broadcast soliciting your input or participation in that, please don't hesitate to volunteer. It's a great way for you to see the application prior to launch, and even then to provide input for us to make any last minute tweaks or corrections to issues. As I mentioned before, we're targeting the new opening of the application EdPass for the 2022-2023 data collection in January of 2023, and then kind of a repeat of the first bullet here, additional webinars. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation. I think, Jess, you'd mentioned that there was possibly another question or any other questions that have come in.
Yep, there's a couple. All right. The first one is, seeing the data in SPPAPR and CSPR context is valuable. Will the submitted files pre-populate those applications right away during data quality check so that the program offices at the state can have a peek of the data in those systems?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm gonna again solicit Barb to provide a more comprehensive response if she can. But those are the question is to integrating other systems within EdPass or with EdPass, and I think those are discussions that are being had. It's just that nothing immediate has been decided. I think Kelly may want to chime in.
Yeah, and that was a great question, Fawn. Thank you for raising that. That's probably one of those that we ought to take back and figure out, is there something that we can do? We did not build it into the system for what we originally planned, but is there something we can do as an interim step? We can certainly look into that. Thank you for asking that question.
Okay.
And I'll add that we'll talk to our other TA providers in the department to find out if they've got existing, like Generate, do they have existing pre-fill reports that could be used that we could talk through? We're going to be actually meeting with the some of the technical assistance providers in coming, I think, about a month from now, to talk about what we're doing and what resources that they've got to be able to support and participate in the process. So more to come. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. There was a question. I'm not sure if anyone's managing the chat as that's attending for the Q&A log, but the question was, EdPass will apply to all 2022-23 files, not just CCD files. Is that correct? And Barb responded and said, yes, that is correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. How will business rules that are doing cross files data check work with the new submission process? Will we have to submit the files at the same time or in a specific sequence?
I'll ask Barb to chime in if there's any additional details that she wants to provide, but when there are cross-file business rules, both files must be submitted in order for that business rule to trigger. So if A is comparing to B, both files must be submitted. If you only submit A, that business rule will not execute.
That's correct. There are a couple, I'm just waiting for the question about, there are some business rules that trigger on files that are due earlier. In that part, we're still working out how we're going to handle that. So, and there's also a question about the 5-year edits. Those ones we're going to get back to you on more details about the 5-year edits, about some of the how cross-file business rules will be handled. It's hard to get that one out. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Barb.
Okay, and we scroll down here. Besides CCD files, what other collections will be added to this process in 2023? All collections, or what is the timeline for all of the other files?
All files will be required in this new application, EdPass. And then when you're asking about the timeline is based on the due date of the files.
Yep. So the files for 21, 22 will still be collected in ESS, while the new OMB package for 22, 23 is collected in EdPass,
Yes, that is correct.
if that helps clarify the state. What about reports like 5-year edit checks? Do those have to be resolved prior to submission? I think Barb just spoke to that. She was anticipating that. And then there's a question. So CSPR Part 1 is moved to January from December with a question.
The CSPR timeline moving from January to December, I am not aware of that. If there's anyone else here from Ed who's aware of that, but I'm not sure about that timeline. We can certainly get an answer for you and post that in the Q&A.
I do not know the answer either, David, so we'll get back to him.
Okay.
It was mentioned that due dates may be extended. Will we know more this fall?
Yes, so the due dates are currently being reviewed by the program offices. And I know it's a minor detail, but it's not really being extended. It's just the due dates are being moved back. I don't want it to sound like there is a due date and then we're giving you an extension. But the due date will be moved.
Yeah, David, can I also add that with the move of the due dates, there are some that are impacted by requirements that are in statute. There are a particular number of dates that we are required to have some information, or this, we have to have 120 days. And so there are some due dates that may not be able to be moved based on the use of the data. As we are posting the file specs, we'll have the data submission organizer updated so that that information will all be available then. But we're trying to work through some of that with our data stewards right now through our data governance process.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, that's a very good point that we do have data that are statutorily required to collect in a certain time. So
That's it for questions in the Q&A box right now.
okay.
Do you want to wait a few minutes, or would you like to just have everyone email PSC if they have any follow-up questions?
I don't mind waiting a few minutes. I know we had allotted 2 hours for this. Kelly or Barb, if you have any comments that you'd like to make while we wait for questions.
Thanks, David. I would just like to go back and remind everybody, we would love to put together a panel of states that have got good processes in place for how they engage their data stewards. I remember when we had the OMB package discussion, I don't want to put you on the spot if Yvette's on here, but Wisconsin described the process that they use to involve their data stewards in the OMB package review. I'm guessing there are other examples like that you'd be able to share with other states. So if there's anybody who would like to volunteer, we would love to have you come and join us in a discussion about that data steward role.
Another question came in, and it says, you may have already mentioned this, but she's wondering if DMS would still be used with EdPass.
I am going to defer that to Barb. Barb, are we planning to parallel that? Or maybe Kelly?
Actually, Chensu can answer the question.
Well, the short answer is that we are still discussing that. So we don't have a definite answer for that yet. So we'll need to get back to you on that. Yeah. But it's in our discussion. Yes.
Thanks, Chinsu. Okay, we'll give folks about 2-3 more minutes. If you think of anything, please throw it in the Q&A log before we wrap things up, but please stick around for a couple more minutes if you can, allowing folks to throw their questions in the chat, in the Q&A log, sorry. Okay, David, there's no other questions, so I'm going to wrap it up if you're okay with that.
Yeah, just before I send it back to you, Jess, I just wanted to thank everyone for their time. I know a lot of this information may be a bit redundant, but we do, like I said at the beginning, we do feel like it is something important. Not only the application is changing quite a bit. I guess it's actually new, but processes are changing significantly. So we do understand that there is some anxiety and a lot of hurdles to overcome, but hopefully with these webinars, whether they're repetitive or not, as you join them and chime in, we can get your input through Q&A and focus groups and whatever it is that you can participate in. And we can work together to get this process up and running and smooth. And the key is usable data as of the due date. So Jess, I'll let you wrap it up.
Yep, that is all accurate, and I will follow David and say thank you guys all for joining. We appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to join us and learn more about modernization and learn how you guys can prepare your states internally to adjust and be prepared for January. As a reminder, we do plan to have webinars every 3 months to review topics related to modernization. I know Kelly mentioned the data note webinar training that we're going to have. That will be a really big one. So we really look forward to whoever writes data notes in your state joining us. It doesn't, necessarily have to be you, just who writes your data notes, who needs to know how to follow the new standards and provide supplemental and sufficient notes. We will send registration information for those webinars. We're going to try and hold them more frequently every few months. So just look out for those. They'll be in the support update as well as dedicated broadcasts. The PowerPoint presentation that we used today, as well as the recording, will be uploaded to the Community of Practice site, and I'm hoping to have it up by the end of the week. Once it's up and available to you all, we will send a broadcast, but you can find it on the Modernization tab of the Community of Practice site. So thank you to everyone at ESB for joining us today. We appreciate everything you guys are communicating to the states, and I know they appreciate any information that we can provide them on modernization. We're kind of all in this together. So let's lean on each other and kind of lift each other up so that come January, we have a really successful Open of EdPass. I'm kind of looking forward to it. So PSC is also preparing to support you guys to the fullest, as we always do. So we will be ready to guide you guys through that process. If you have any questions, you know where to find us by phone or email. But again, thank you for your time and your participation today. If you have any questions, please reach out to PSC and we'll work with Ed to get you a response. But as you close out WebEx, please keep in mind that there is a post-webinar survey. Just take a few minutes if you can to answer that for the department so we can follow suit with future webinars. Thank you guys and have a wonderful afternoon.